Exploding Dice Radio.
Greetings, Ruckdog here. I am back on the EDR YouTube channel with a little bit of an experiment. This is the first of what will hopefully be a series of videos I'm referring to as the Workbench, because this is going to be a video about how I painted my Ice Maiden. And the idea is that if this goes well and it's well received, then maybe I'll do some other videos about some of the other painting projects that I'm working on. Now, this is, like I said, an experiment, my first try at doing a tutorial video on how to paint something. So bear with me, this is going to be a little rough. I definitely forgot to hit the record button on a few of the steps that I took while I was painting my Ice Maiden here. So I'll have to explain those when they come by and try and get everybody caught up. But yeah, please take a look here, sit back, and see my first work in progress / tutorial video on how I painted my Ice Maiden. Let's get started. So the first step, as with pretty much any model you're going to do, is to get all of your components cleaned up and dry fitted. Very minimal cleanup to do on this model. Most of the parts were mold line free, very little flash, but I still took my time to make sure everything was absolutely cleaned up and everything fit pretty well. One of the decisions I had to make was these little ports on the sides of the Ice Maiden. These were designed to fit these little platforms like you see here, and the kit comes with enough platforms to put all 6, 3 on each side, into place. Now, I had a couple of options. I could either leave them off, glue them on, or try and magnetize them. I decided against the magnetization because I couldn't see any reasonable need to take them on or off during any kind of gaming situation. And I decided to just put the ones on the aft end in place. The Tesla weapons here actually fit pretty well into their assigned slots without much trouble. And again, there was a magnetization option here because I had the rest of the doors to model that spot on the front of the ship as either closed or with the Tesla cannons extended and ready to fire. And I chose to just glue the Tesla cannons in place in their extended position. Again, because I couldn't see any reasonable situation in a game where I'd want to remove the cannons and then put them back on. But like I said, pretty tight fit here. Had a very good mechanical fit. Didn't need a whole lot of glue to hold them in there, I don't think. So that was definitely an interesting point, and I think a little bit of good design work on the part of the War Cradle team. So that was exciting to see. Now that I got everything dry fit, it was time to move on to the priming. To prime this one, I actually used the Vallejo Black Surface Primer, as you saw there, and my airbrush. I've recently started moving towards doing airbrush priming as opposed to doing the old-fashioned spray can or rattle can priming. And the reason why is that this gives me a lot more control using the airbrush. And it also gives, it's also not nearly as noxious in terms of the smell. So I'm able to do this indoors all year round with the aid of my spray booth here, as opposed to having to rely on nice weather so I can go outside and not completely smell up the entire house with the fumes from the spray can. A lot of nooks and crannies on this model. Had to take a number of light passes. Don't want to build up the paint so thick that it runs. But I got pretty good coverage out of that Vallejo primer. It didn't really take a whole lot to prime the entire model, even considering how big it is and how many little nooks and crannies there are. Once I got the main part of the hull done, it was then time to move on to the superstructure. And just like before, making a number of light passes to slowly build up the primer coat. Don't want to go too thick at once and get runs or other excessive paint buildup there. Once the primer was done, I started in with the first stage of the highlighting. This is something you'll see referred to as zenithal priming because you're trying to simulate a top-down light source. And what I did is I took a couple of shades of gray and sprayed it from a top-down direction onto the model. So in other words, I held the model at a vertical angle and more or less sprayed the paint straight down. Did the same thing to the hull of the Ice Maiden. Again, starting with a gray and then working my way to a lighter color. It should be noted that the grays that I'm painting here aren't intended to really show fully on the final model. They're just there to provide a little bit of an initial highlighting coat to start bringing out some of the depth of the model, because it's all going to get covered up by other colors for the most part later on. Again, this is a multi-step process here. I'm using a slightly lighter gray. And once we're done with the lighter gray, you'll see that I'll go to just a very, very little bit of white. And I'll wind up going pretty heavy with the white on the flight deck, because we need to get the flight deck base coated in white so that we can do the markings of the flight deck lines. Yeah, so here you can see the coat of white going down. This is what's going to provide the very bright white lines, because we're going to end up masking this white and then painting the brown over it, which we'll see here in a little bit. Also, while I was at it and had the white loaded up in the paintbrush, I went through and did a base coat on all of the ice portions of the model. Now, obviously, I'm getting quite a bit of overspray here, and that's fine. This is not going to be the final detail coat. This is just the base coat. This is designed to get ahead of that black primer we did, essentially, and start whitening it up enough so that it starts to look like ice. And there we go. With just that base coat and the zenithal primer, you can see we're already making some dramatic progress. Excuse me. Now here we go with the flight deck marking. For this, I'm using some very thin 0.75 millimeter masking tape. I got this from a company called Jammy Dog. They're a British company that does all kinds of fine masking tapes like this. I've had really good luck making models and markings with this masking tape. What I'm doing here is I'm putting 3 parallel lines down each part of the angled flight deck. And these lines are going to start off as completely solid lines. In other words, no dashes, and we'll worry about the dashing later on. For right now, though, just getting these solid lines down. And of course, this step right here requires a little bit of patience and a little bit of attention to detail, because you have to get the lines parallel and straight for everything to work out right. And you also have to do a little bit of trimming around certain details that you don't want to get painted or masked off, I should say. And so that's what I'm doing right here. In this particular instance, I'm trimming around the iron cross that's on the very bow of the model. Now that we got all of the masking done, it's time to move on to base coating the deck. We're going to use brown paint for this. This is a very efficient way to go about it, because with the airbrush, it doesn't take a lot of paint. You can keep it thin. Obviously, you want to try and not get it too thick, because you don't want to soak through the masking tape. That's going to happen no matter what, and as a matter of fact, it did happen on this project, but by using the airbrush, you can keep it light enough that you minimize the amount that happens. It's important to make sure that all of the masking tape and the masked areas get covered over in the brown, that you don't leave any white spots or any missed areas with the brown as you go, because you want to make sure that when you remove your masking tape, you got it in good shape. At the same time, after I got done with the deck, I started painting the engine area at the back of the ship in copper. This is a metallic Vallejo model air paint that I'm using on this to start the sort of the shining up of that. It's a steampunk model, and I always find that extra shiny bits of brass in various places along the model really help to sell that steampunk look. Here I'm using a dark gray metallic color to base coat the Tesla weapons, sort of give them that initial metallic look. Alright, so here we've gotten the masking tape pulled off, and you can see that we've got 3 white lines on each part of the flight deck. And what I'm starting to do here is I'm starting to work on masking off the dashes. So basically what I'm doing is I'm marking off a series of individually sized equal width pieces of masking tape. And I'm going to take those and I'm going to apply those down the center stripe on each part of the flight deck. And this is what's going to provide us with our dashes. Now, remember that it's going to be a little bit of an inverse. The parts you see that are masked off are going to be the parts that stay white. So I go ahead and place these down the edge of the flight deck, again trying to keep the spacing between them even. And now that I've gotten all those masked off, the next step is going to be to paint brown over the rest of the masking tape and basically put those dashes into the deck for us. This is somewhat similar to what's oftentimes referred to as the ladder method, and I've seen it referred to that in a couple other contexts in terms of painting aircraft carrier decks on models. All right, so here we go, painting in the brown to cover up the white. Now, in this case, we want to make sure that we get all of the white lines showing in between the bits of masking tape painted brown. Don't necessarily have to paint and make sure that all of the tape is turned brown, but we definitely want to make sure that all the white lines in between the pieces of tape do get turned brown, so that way we can develop that dashed pattern on the deck that we're after. As with before, trying to do this in some light coats to slowly build up the color. We don't want to put too much paint on the model to end up having it seep under the masking tape and kind of mess up the dashed effect that we're going for here. That being said, you do have to make sure you put on enough paint to completely cover up the white, and so that you don't have any of the lines left over there. All right, so here we go. Pretty much getting all of that covered up pretty well by now. It's more or less where we need it to be, I think. Again, just make sure you take your time and really check closely to make sure you've gotten all the areas covered. While I was in the spray booth, I started highlighting all these little honeycomb cells on the engine piece in white. And this is to support doing the glow effect in those little engine cells. That's going to be a step we're going to do a little bit later. This is what they call a ghost tint made by Badger. It is called plasma fluid. Gives a really nice kind of bluish green color, I guess, and this is what I like to use for things like this. It gives a nice sort of electric blue glow to things when you undercoat it in white. So I applied that to the engine block, and I also applied it to the little Tesla coil weapons pieces for the bow. And so that gives that nice electric blue glow, like I said, to both the Tesla weapons and to the engine piece at the back end of the ship. All right, so here we go with the big unmasking. Now, when I unmasked my model, I did notice a few areas where the brown paint had seeped under the masking tape, and I also did notice a few spots where the masking tape actually pulled up some of the paint and left some gray underneath. That is somewhat expected in a lot of these cases, just requires a little bit of touch-up afterwards. So here you can see, after just a little bit of touch-up, that we have a really sharp effect. You might wonder why I bother with the masking, since it's such a hassle and having to do touch-ups anyway, but honestly, I think it gives just as good, if not better, of an effect than it would if you were to try to do this all with decals. And it also has the little bit of an added advantage that I can play with it a little bit more with paint to try and fix mistakes and everything else. So here we go. I'm just showing some of the base coating I've done on the non-ice parts of the hull and some of the brass pipework, as well as a few of the decks that are below the main flight deck. The iron cross on the bow was a particular point that I wanted to pay some close attention to, so here I am painting the iron cross in a very dark gray. I'm actually not using a black, I'm using a very dark gray. I used to use black for this sort of thing, but I found recently that going with like a really dark Panzer gray almost, it feels like it works better because it's not a pure black. It's not just a black hole on the model. It's got a little bit of color tone to it, and you know, as a gray as opposed to a true black. And I just feel like it gives a better appearance overall. Now, once I got the thing painted in black, this now came the tricky part: getting the edging done in white. I could have just left it a solid color, but you know, the classic iron cross always has this white outline to it, and I wanted to try and capture that, especially since it's such a prevalent spot on the model. I kind of roughed it in. You can see here that it's not very neat. The white line is pretty rough. It's not of a uniform thickness, but if I go back in with the gray paint, I can kind of even out that line and thin it out a little bit from the inside out. And this takes some playing back and forth, switching between the gray and the white. But eventually I was able to get it to a state that I was pretty happy with. You know, it's not perfect, but it's a pretty close line. Now, the separation between the angled flight deck and the fore and aft portion of the flight deck has a raised ridge that I decided to do as a red and white dashed line, as you can see here. And the other thing that I had to start working on after I got the dashed line done was figuring out how to clean up the rest of the parts on the hull and getting some of the other metallics done. The ice itself I washed with a very light blue wash and a purple wash in a couple of different areas. And then once the purple and the blue washes were on the ice, I dry brushed it with a white, and that sort of brought out the final ice color. And once the ice was done, then I had to go through and base coat all of the sort of the metallic parts, whatever was going to be quote unquote metal, with the gray. And this gave me a great opportunity to clean up any overspray areas, to clean up any areas where different colors got slopped into a area that I didn't want it, and just overall sort of tighten up the appearance of the model. And this was a little tedious. I mean, there's a lot of different areas to cover, and to be fair, I wasn't as neat as I probably could have been with the airbrush in a few spots, so I had to touch up more than I might, strictly speaking, needed to have done. But it still wasn't that bad of a process. It seemed to go pretty fast. Trick here was keeping the paint thinned a little bit, not using it straight from the pot, adding a little bit of water to it. That really helped it get into some of the recesses, and also helped me avoid glopping on paint too thick as I went. All right, everybody, here is the finished product. I've done a few steps since the last little clip. First of all, did a strong tone wash over the entire flight deck to give it this much deeper brown look, and to start trying and call out some of those individual wood pieces, the individual planks on the flight deck. I've also done a lot of work with the Army Painter Weapons Bronze and all these little pipes and other little shiny doodads along the side. That was really sort of a four-step process. First step was to base coat with the weapon bronze, and then I applied some of the strong tone ink to the bronze areas to help darken them down and make it look a little richer. Then a little bit of dry brush with the weapons bronze after that to lighten them up just a touch and to kind of provide a little bit of a highlight. And then finally, in a couple of select areas, I used a little bit of this Neolaka oxide, which provides a nice verdigris look to some of that brass work. Now, I use that very sparingly. It was what I found in using this particular product on other Dystopian Wars models, is that the scaling is sort of a little off. This works really well for like 28 millimeter stuff, because it was designed to be obviously used on like 40K models and the like. But these 1/1200 scales, if not used carefully, it starts to get a little weird looking. So, like I said, just a few areas. Like if you look here at this little pipe junction, I worked a little bit into that crease, that seam that's right there. And if we flip it around to the other side here, you can see around whatever this doodad is here, I worked a little bit of it into the lines there. And that just gives a nice little extra touch to it. Other detail work included painting the aircraft. I did most of them using a color called, it's field growl or field gray, although it ends up looking more like a green color. This is from the Flames of War line, but of course there's a standard color for this in the model color line from Vallejo. I did one plane here next to the island in red. That's a similar scheme that I've used on my tiny flyer tokens for my Prussian Ace aircraft, so I figured I would just carry that over there, and thought it'd be a nice touch. I got the island superstructure all detailed up. You'll see that I did the similar white outlining on the Prussian cross on the island structure as I did to the one on the flight deck, just to sort of visually tie all that together. A little bit of additional light weathering here on the flight deck with some dark gray black, and also around the funnels or the smokestacks there, just to give them kind of a little bit of a worn look. And then one other little detail I did to the whole thing is that all of the whites, and it might not really show very well in the picture, but all the white ice on here has been given a coat of gloss varnish. And for that I use the Vallejo gloss varnish. It comes in another little dropper bottle, just like most of other Legos things. Here you go, right here. And the goal was to give a certain visual differentiation that, you know, this is not just white metal or some other material, but it's definitely supposed to be ice. And so I find that this little gloss coat on it gives it a nice wet look almost. So it helps your brain process this as, oh, hey, this is some sort of water ice. It's not a stone or any other type of natural material. Yeah, so anyway, like I said, that's about it. Here is the finished Ice Maiden. So, you know, and you'll see this here in a minute when I throw up a quick gallery of some of the detailed pictures on it, but, you know, this is not a competition grade job or anything like that. I mean, this is my usual rough and ready game table quality level of work. But I gotta say, I'm happy with how it came out, and it only took me about a week or so to get it to this point, so I feel like I was reasonably efficient in getting this knocked out. And I can't wait to use it in the game, although I'll have to convince somebody to let me take this thing because the stats for it do look a little OP. But in the meantime, it'll definitely work nice as a great display piece. So yeah, that's probably where it'll spend a lot of its time sitting on one of my shelves on display. Alright folks, well, I'll put up a quick gallery and then that'll be it. Until next time, good luck and good hunting.